Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Joyce Pisnanont, and I'm with the National Coalition for Asian Pacific American Community Development. And I'm so glad to be here with you this afternoon and to be the moderator for our final session today here at the inaugural SBAN conference. I'm also very honored to be part of the advisory board for SBAN and just really want to thank the staff and all the folks who worked so hard, including many of you, in planning this really great event. So thank you for attending 2 days of jam-packed, excellent content and for sticking with us to the very end to this final breakout session. And I'll just say, I think we saved the best insights for last. So today, I'm pleased to introduce Jose Miranda of Chhaya CDC and Bianca Blomquist of Small Business Majority. We are so fortunate to have their insights into what I would argue is one of the most important aspects of fighting displacement, which is organizing and mobilizing our people, right? So the process of bringing people along and identifying and building up champions for our collective cause to keep small businesses in the communities we care about is super important. And on some level, we should have, we don't have enough time to talk about all of this, but we'll try to cram in what we can in the next hour. And so, I'll just say that part of what makes this conversation so interesting is that we're not just organizing any people, right? But we're organizing entrepreneurs whom all of us who are on this call know. They are super busy people running their businesses, and you're really lucky if you can just get like a 5-minute conversation to fill them in on, what you care about, what's the issue that you're asking them to engage in. So today's really a conversation. We're going to talk about what organizing and mobilizing looks like with small businesses and really what should it look like. And then we, of course, want to invite you as the audience to pipe in, to share your feedback and your insights and your questions. We know there's a ton of experience in this virtual space today. So we've saved some time at the end to really hopefully hear from you. So since we only have an hour, let's get going. I'm going to ask our speakers to do a more thorough introduction of themselves and their organizations, but just let me say really briefly how amazing these folks are and how incredible their organizations are in doing the work that they're doing. So first is Bianca Blomquist. She is the California Policy Director and Northern California Outreach Director at Small Business Majority. That is a very long title, which tells you how important she is. She is doing a ton of work. And we are very, very lucky today because Bianca also has worked on Capitol Hill as a member of the House for a member of the House Financial Services Committee. And so, of course, she brings a lot of insights into how the sausage gets made at the federal level too. So we're very lucky to have that. Our other speaker is Jose Miranda. He's the Director of Programs at Chhaya CDC, and under his leadership, his amazing team offers a wide range of services, and they really are truly pros at mobilizing, organizing low-income tenants and businesses. I will say I am in constant awe of the Chhaya team and what they're able to do in Queens, New York. And I know that our organization regularly turns to their staff to ask them, how do you do this? So welcome, Bianca and Jose. And if you could each just start us off with a brief intro of yourself, your organizations, just so that our participants get some context about where you're coming from this work. And maybe I'll start with Jose first.
Great. Thank you so much, Joyce, for that amazing introduction. I've never been more flattered in my life. But I'm Jose Miranda. I'm the Director of Programs at Chhaya CDC. Chhaya is a community development corporation based in Queens, New York. And we focus on building the economic and political power of the South Asian and Indo-Caribbean communities. We offer a wide range of services from tenant counseling, tenant organizing, home ownership, both pre-purchase and post-purchase programs, economic justice, asset building programs. We do work in civic engagement, immigration legal services, ESOL, workforce development. We try to be as close to a one-stop shop as we can for South Asian and Indo-Caribbean community members throughout Queens and sometimes throughout New York City. We know that this is a population that's often underserved and with new waves of immigration, very vulnerable to predatory actors across multiple sectors. So at Chhaya, we both want to provide direct service and assist folks, but really bring them together to show their collective power and really be a voice in New York City.
Okay, I'll jump in. My name is Bianca Blomquest. I'm the Policy Director and Northern California Outreach Director for Small Business Majority. To share with you all a little bit about how our organization works, we are first and foremost a 501c3. This means we're a nonprofit organization. I'm sure many folks already know that. We are headquartered in Washington, D.C., but we have a historic presence in California, Colorado, Illinois, Georgia, Wisconsin, and the DMV metro region in Maryland, Virginia. And our business is really based on two fundamental beliefs. You know, we believe that small business owners are essential building blocks for a thriving and inclusive economy. And because of that, small business owners deserve every access to all the tools and resources they need to start a business, to expand their business, and to invest in their business. We also believe that there is an authentic voice of small business owners that exists in public policy, but it's vastly underrepresented or misrepresented by larger business interests. So we work to engage small business owners in Sacramento, here in California, where I'm tuning in from, as well as in Washington, D.C., to really share with elected officials those issues that are most pressing for small businesses. So while Jose focuses in a local community, our organization and my work tends to span statewide, which is something I think is going to be really interesting and illuminating for folks that are tuning in, the dynamic between how our organizations work together to ensure that small business owners do actually have a voice and that their voices are heard. Not just locally, but also on a state level and a federal level.
Great. Thank you both so much. And just, you know, again, amazing work and feeling so lucky that we have you with us today. So let's start off this conversation with asking each of you to define organizing within the small business context and to give us a sense of what it looks like for your organizations when you say you're doing small business organizing and mobilizing. And maybe tell us, like, why is it important to your work? Why does it move your work forward? And maybe Bianca, if you want to take this one first, that'd be great.
Yeah. I mean, I think just taking a step back and thinking about the importance of organizing small business owners. You know, listen, in a very contentious political climate, small business owners remain incredible voices among constituencies to elected officials. They are pillars of their community. They're oftentimes very close and tied with trusted institutions. We've heard from many of the folks in the last couple of days at SBAN. You know, these trusted institutions are really part and parcel for small business owners' ability to thrive, either disseminating information, hiring, you know, their neighbors, their family members, folks from their community, investing those dollars back in their community. So small business owners remain a very important voice when it comes to political discourse. And so in that kind of, and then also recognizing, you know, that the majority of small businesses are micro businesses. The vast majority of small businesses are those very, very small businesses that oftentimes have less than 10 employees. And what's similar about all these businesses is they tend to lack a dedicated HR department. They tend to lack access to legal expertise, regulatory expertise, so they can stay on top of and take advantage of all of the loopholes that exist in our current tax code, for better or for worse. And so That being said, they're also very busy. And so these business owners that are very small, that are really important in political discourse, are not necessarily easy to organize. It takes a lot of time and effort because small business owners are fundamentally very busy people. And so I think that that's one of the reasons why organizing is so important. And when we say organize, and I think it might be slightly different depending on who you talk to, and that's a good thing, right? Because there's not one type of business owner everywhere. There's not one type of organizing business owners everywhere, but elevating their voice, elevating what issues actually matter to them, and conveying their sentiments to elected officials so that the policies that come out of Sacramento, the policies that come out of DC, and definitely the policies that come out on a local level, have a small business owner's interest best at heart, and also understands some of the structural and systemic barriers that small business owners face when it comes to participating in the economy.
Thanks, Bianca. And, Jose, I want to ask you the same question. What do you think organizing really looks like in your context? And if I could ask you to maybe specifically lift up, what does this look like within the immigrant context? And what does it look like when you're working in a really diverse community like Jackson Heights, where you're having to build and organize across different racial communities and groups?
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. Yeah, I think a lot of the rationale for the work that we do is very related to what Bianca covered. I would say for us at Chhaya, across all of our programs and all of our work, we sort of see ourselves as an anti-gentrification, anti-displacement organization. And our main goal with our small business program in Jackson Heights is to really preserve the immigrant community there. It's a thriving immigrant community. Jackson Heights is probably one of the most ethnically diverse places on the planet. I think I read somewhere a few months back that there's like 160 different languages spoken just in Jackson Heights, this small, like 6 square mile area of New York City. So we really want to preserve that against these other pressures. And a lot of that diversity does come from the immigrant community, who are, new to the country, new to the U.S. financial system, maybe have limited English proficiency, and don't know how to navigate all of the red tape of being a business, much less being able to advocate for themselves in their neighborhood against pressures from city and state governments, pressures from developers. Jackson Heights is also a transit hub in New York City, so it's very valuable real estate. Thousands and thousands of people come through there every single day, even from outside of the neighborhood. Part of that reason is because it's so ethnically diverse, but also, again, it's a transit hub. It's near Manhattan, and so there are all of these different pressures, and one person alone, right, to Bianca's point, who is the owner operator of their business and working 12 to 14-hour days just trying to make a living and employ community members, often doesn't have the capacity and bandwidth to think about some of these larger issues. And so for us, the organizing work is trying to help carve out a little bit of that time to be able to do some political education and understand that there are avenues to advocate for yourself and push back against these market and policy pressures.
Great. And, I guess if I could again lift up, if either of you have any thoughts about sort of, how we do this work across multiple communities of color. And if you see of any great examples in your own work, I'd love to hear that. And part of the reason why I bring that up is because, I sat in on this morning's opening plenary, and that was actually one of the key things that people asked about, right? Like, how do we how do we really do this work in solidarity with those communities that are most vulnerable, knowing that we're all fighting that same fight? And so I know this wasn't on our scripted list of questions, but just knowing, the expertise you both bring into the room, I'd love to hear, if you have any thoughts about that. Jose, I don't know if you want to go first, or Bianca.
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit because it's actually something we've been having a lot of conversations about pretty recently. Jackson Heights, for as diverse as it is still, it's especially in the small business community, I'd say a little bit ethnically segregated, just because there have been different waves of immigration that have come in, right? So different ethnic groups over the decades coming in, establishing businesses. So a lot of the newer businesses come from the Himalayan community, and a lot of the older businesses from India, Pakistan. And so there's different types of businesses across the ethnicities too. So it's not just a ethnic divide, but a sector divide too, where restaurants and jewelry stores have competing priorities, for example. And so, we've had a lot of conversations recently about how do we bring the groups together to work with one another. And I think it's really about starting with areas of agreement and commonality. It can be as simple as how do we bring groups together to share resources and plan for trash pickup if sanitation is a concern in the neighborhood, and then just kind of building from there, I think is our plan today, right? Start with what's common, get some easy wins, and then that provides value for folks, right? It shows them what happens when you come together. And so we're hopeful that that'll be our path forward.
Totally. I mean, everything Jose is saying, I'm just like 100% absolutely. I mean, I think one of the issues that us as organizations that work in this space, as nonprofit organizations, is, collaboration. Because one of the things that our organizations have in common is we are all at capacity. And so instead of, recreating the wheel, having those conversations with partners, reaching out to new partners, and identifying those areas of alignment is 110% the way to go, because our organizations, unless they do the exact same thing, are not going to have always the exact same priorities. So being able to identify one or two priorities for both organizations, building each other's organizational capacity to do great work is really the name of the game. And that's on the organizational side. But on the small business side, I'm not a small business owner. And so I'm not going to purport to speak for small business owners, but what I hear from small business owners in my work is that, the issues that I'm facing are not always the issues that I'm hearing about from some of these larger business organizations, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Cal Chamber here in California. A lot of these organizations represent small businesses, but a small business, technically, according to some federal regulators, can be as large as 500 employees. And I'm telling you that the needs of a business that has 10 employees, 3 employees, is the owner operator, and is self-employed is vastly different than the needs of someone who employs 100, 300, or 500 people. And this is really key, because if a small business doesn't necessarily see an organization that is representing them, they don't have access to they have access to information, but it's not always the quality information, and including the tools that they need to help them succeed. So one of the things that my organization, we conduct third-party independent polling and research, as well as in-network surveys. And one of the top issues that small businesses identify as an issue to them that you never hear anywhere else is, I'm struggling affording healthcare. I want to offer benefits to my employees and I can't afford it. Or I tried to get a loan at my community bank and no one will work with me because I've only been in business for a year, or I just opened. But my father, for example, was able to go to his community bank and get a loan. when he first started his business. So why can't I do the same things? They go to Google, they type in, I need access to capital. So there's some of these issues, and you just don't hear about that in places outside of this conference at SBAN. The real issues that are facing small businesses. Jose brought up the issue of public transportation and the impact that it can have on communities, particularly small business corridors, oftentimes with small businesses of color. And that's one thing that I really appreciate about this conference, is that as the first, gentrification conference, I've really been looking for those tools and those innovative ideas and solutions to take back to the small business community about ways that folks can grow with their business, grow with their community, be adaptable and flexible to change, but not have to leave in order to be successful. And so, yeah, I just wanted to flag the gentrification piece is very important. And that's not something you're going to hear from the larger business organizations that purport to represent very small businesses.
Right. Yeah, and this is indeed like a very unique and special space. And so, it's exciting that we have this opportunity to have this conversation today and to be able to share our insights with each other. And so that actually leads me to my next question, which is, this is like the insider tips that we're hoping to learn from our two experts here today on the panel. And so, what I'm really hoping to hear from both of you is, like, what are 2 or 3 lessons that you've learned in your organizing work? What are the things that you would want to share with others who are on the call? I know that I've tried my hand at small business organizing in a previous job, and it's super hard. And I'm sure that other folks on the call would love to hear, how can I do this better? What do you have to share with these folks? And I will note that, Jose, there's a very specific question for you in the chat. If you could, as you're talking about your piece, how did you start to build trust and gain buy-in? So maybe I'll start with you again, Jose, and then we'll go to Bianca.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a perfect question to sort of address this, because that is a challenge. Our small business program is fairly new. We started it about 4 years ago. And it was a challenge early on to work with businesses for, the reasons that we mentioned before. So many owner-operated businesses, they've got so much on their plate. And it was really about having those individual conversations and building trust early on. So that can look as simple as stopping by a business, talking to them about some of their issues, and hearing, I recently got a fine from New York City for lack of signage for one of the services that I provided, and connecting them to a resource that can help them navigate that, potentially get it reduced, things like that. Just getting those like early small wins were so important. So, you don't come in knocking on their door saying, we've got a commercial rent stabilization campaign that we're working on. Do you want to sign up? It's really come in, build that relationship, that individual relationship with the business, prove your worth by getting some of those small wins and helping them out, and then building from there. So I think that's a really big lesson learned from us, that luckily, we were able to sort of start out with. I'll also say, we have a long history of doing tenant organizing on the residential side, and we're able to bring a lot of those lessons learned over to our small business program. But, small businesses are very unique to individuals. Oftentimes, another thing that we had to sort of learn and figure out how we navigate is in the immigrant-owned business community in Jackson Heights, we would often see a lot of subletting of spaces, subdivisions of spaces. And so when we've traditionally thought about sort of tenant organizing, whether that's residential or commercial, you think about organizing against a landlord. Well, there might be 2 people in the building, and they have different landlords because each of them has, sublet that space from someone else. And so I think another lesson for us is really figuring out how to elicit a lot of that information kind of early on and understand what some of the challenges are. There's a lot of, learning legalese and talking with our legal service provider partners in the community to help understand. And so I think it's, if I could wrap it up in one thing, it's in addition to building the relationship, it's doing a lot of fact finding, doing a lot of understanding early on to really help inform what the long-term strategy will be.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I was trying to take notes, but I have too many tabs open and I'm afraid it'll slow down my computer. But proving your worth really resonated to me, recognizing, again, small business owners, let's talk about their email inbox, for example, is probably flooded with emails, people trying to sell you stuff, people, trying to advise you to do X, Y, and Z and Y. So, I mean, being able to finding an organization like Chhaya or Small Business Majority as a small business owner whose inbox is overflowed with these unsolicited messages. And some of them are great. Listen, there's a lot of us in the S-band community that I've seen today, and we send emails to our business owners, but expecting a business owner to be able to pick and choose, who the right person to work with is really hard. So when you do get a small business owner in front of you, when you are able to talk to a small business owner at their business or at a workshop or after a webinar, doing that follow-up, proving your worth is key. You first of all want to make sure that they're aware that you're probably a mission-driven organization or a nonprofit. You're not trying to sell them something. And it takes a while, there always sounds, when you reach out to someone like that, when someone reaches out to me like that, you're kind of like, what's the hook? What's the angle here? So really trying to explain the value add that you have as an organization. Doing the fact finding takes hours. Jose, I'm sure you're an expert on things that you had never imagined you would be an expert on when, a few years ago. It's amazing the things that you learn, but it's that intentional, really time intensive work, building that relationship with that person so they recognize that they can call your cell phone if they have questions, recognizing that you won't know the answer to half of the questions that they have. But our job is to find out who does know that information, who can help that small business owner, and following through. And listen, this can be really tough when we're all dealing with capacity issues and everything from COVID-19, but I think that makes it all the more important. And especially now when small business owners are starting to notice, I'm definitely noticing this, they're not at the top of every news story anymore. These federal programs like PPP and EIDL, the state $4 billion COVID-19 relief grant program, those programs aren't being discussed anymore. And so small business owners that I talk to say, sometimes I feel like I'm almost in a worse position than I was in 2020 because now my doors are open and people think that everything's okay on the other side. So it takes a lot of time, but I really think those one-on-one relationships that you build through fact finding, delivering with that small business owner, being consistent is the number one way to demonstrate that you're worth a small business owner's most valuable asset, which is their time.
That's a great way of putting it, Bianca. And I guess as you're both talking, one of the things I'm sort of sitting with is, let's say you get that small business owner who you can turn to as your champion, your voice for the issue that you really want to be moving forward on a key campaign or policy initiative that you're working on. There are these layers that we have to kind of fight through at the local level to the regional to the national. And I think, we've been there. All of us have probably been there where we've gotten this small business owner to kind of share their voice. And that's a long slog in a process, right? Like they've shared their voice and there was this like immediate reaction of like, okay, great. Now that's, what's next? And it might be a long time before anything changes. And so I guess, I'd love to hear from you, like, how do you manage that? How do you work with the small business owners that you work with to help them understand that this is a process, right? That this change is a process, and to keep them engaged over time? Again, another unscripted question, but just as you both were talking, I was like, oh, you must deal with this all the time. And I imagine others in the audience might too. And Bianca, I don't know if you want to tackle that first.
I would love to, if you don't mind. I mean, I think, for us, I see a huge part of my job as creating those opportunities and identifying those opportunities and literally bringing those opportunities to the small business owner. Because again, recognizing that the last thing that they have is time, right? They're not going to have the time to draft up an op-ed or an LTE and then pitch, that's our job. So our job is to identify those small business owners, bring them the opportunity, make it as easy as possible for them to sign on and support, and then leverage our collective power. I also see my job as having relationships with folks like Jose. Jose's in New York, so it's a little bit far, but when we have an office in New York, that would be the job of my counterpart in the New York office, is to have those relationships with Jose and say, listen, I just spoke to a small business owner that used a really great anti-gentrification tool. I was just on the previous panel, not on it, but I was listening to the previous panel with Jay Norris and his really cool tool with commercial lease technology and the ability to change the dynamic between a commercial landlord and their tenant to be more symbiotic, because that's in fact what they are. But reaching out to Jose and saying, hey, I have a small business owner who used this tool. Perhaps there's not an opportunity to engage at a state level, but you better believe there's going to be an opportunity for that person to plug in on a local level. I mean, county supervisors, city council meetings. I mean, and really a lot of the nitty gritty happens at the local and regional levels, especially when it comes to those things that really impact small business owners. So I think creating those opportunities and identifying those opportunities and working with your partner organizations to make sure that the number one thing that we're here to do, which is to elevate the voice of small business owners, actually gets done at whatever level.
Yeah, that's great. I think, for us, we're much more locally focused. And so I think engagement sort of takes a few different pathways. There's the engagement around certain core campaigns that we might be working on. But as we talked about earlier, right, there's also the hyper local sort of needs of a business and keeping them engaged. About how to work with other businesses or some of the issues facing, maybe it's just like one particular block or a streetlight being out, and sort of keeping them engaged around some of those hyper local issues. And then, we're lucky enough at Chhaya to be an organization that sort of has a lot of arms in a lot of different places. And so can we tap into other campaigns to keep folks engaged, right? So maybe we're not talking about the challenges of commercial tenants in New York City, but Chhaya is also involved in a campaign for a public bank in New York. And can we engage with small business owners about some of the benefits that a public bank would have, and see if they're willing to engage in a campaign like that and talk to folks. And I think, lastly, there's always a need for more stories and more businesses to come together. So, just having businesses talk to other small business owners in their network about some of these things and seeing if they can get them involved and engaged is really valuable, right? Because to the point Bianca was making before, folks are really inundated with offers all the time. In immigrant communities, we see a really high level of skepticism because there's so many predatory actors, that having a cosign of a fellow small business owner, someone you already have a relationship with, is really, really valuable. And so can we leverage small business owners to talk to other small business owners and bring them in is a great other way to keep folks engaged.
That's great insights. Thank you both. So we've actually only got about 20 minutes left, and I know we want to save some time in case there are some questions from the audience, but I do have, one last question for you both, which is, as we've talked about already, there's multiple layers to this work. We've got the local, we've got the regional, we've got the national. And, the beauty of this S-band network is that we're all working at all those different levels. And what I'm wondering about is, what could, from your perspective, what could we be doing better to kind of connect those tissues together, right? Like, how can we connect some of the work that's happening between the local and the regional and the regional and the national, or the local and the national, and if there are examples of how your organization is doing that, key strategies you've used, I think folks would probably love to hear that. And maybe I'll go to Bianca again and then Jose.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think holding events like this and what S-band has been doing consistently on Fridays and meeting and gathering folks that wouldn't normally work together is really unique. And that's something that, because here in California, so I'm in the Bay Area, when you go to a small business event, you're likely to see, the usual suspects there. They're great suspects. I mean, we have amazing folks here in the Bay Area. Project, I mean, I won't even get going, but there's a ton of great folks here. But what's unique about what S-band has been doing has been putting us in a room to discuss the same topics we would otherwise, but with organizations we may not have ever heard of before, that are contending with different regulatory regimes. They're in different states, they're in different communities, and so their approaches to some of these issues are fundamentally different just because they're dealing with a different structure. And I think and there's always areas of alignment as well, but finding those differences and using those as a learning opportunity is really unique. So I appreciate that about this kind of national network that S-band has created, because we have those networks on a local level, sometimes even on a state level, but these national networks where you're able to get into these smaller work groups is really helpful. So I don't really know if I have any recommendations on what could be done better. But I can tell you from our organization, even within internally at Small Business Majority, continuing to think about the federal to state to local connection, explicitly having a conversation about it, and capitalizing on those opportunities. So when there's for example, the State Small Business Credit Initiative that many folks have been hearing about has finally been received by many states as part of the American Rescue Plan. And these dollars are supposed to be used by states to incentivize small business lending for small business owners, particularly really small ones and business owners of color. But how is that important to some of these really local community-based organizations on the ground in the Bay Area? So taking that federal action, we created a sign-on campaign with a letter of recommendations to U.S. Treasury on how we think those funds should be spent, and then circulating that to our folks on the ground and asking for their feedback and their support in signing on to that campaign, both recognizes the capacity of the organizations that we're working with, but also leverages our presence in Washington, D.C. And I think the key there is that communications piece, bringing the information to these folks and just briefly explaining it and creating the opportunity to engage really breaks down those federal to state to local silos that I think exist.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree that these networking opportunities are really, really helpful for organizations like ours, particularly national ones. I remember speaking, just a few months back to our small business organizer who attended the national capacity convening, and being able to take lessons learned from other organizations who are doing similar work across the country was so valuable and informative for our team. So I think that's really helpful to really help understand that the challenges we face, especially, our New York City Eagles, sometimes we like to think that we're unique and the circumstances here in New York are unique, but, seeing that these same things are happening across other states, being part of coalitions that have memberships across New York State also really helps us, connect to issues and try to brainstorm and figure out ways to work together to overcome them. And I think what's really important is to find those solutions together as well, not just with other sort of like-minded organizations, but how do we bring financial institutions into the mix? How do we bring local and state government officials into the same room, right? In New York City, we're infamous for having our mayors and our governors always at odds with one another. So can we leverage opportunities to bring both levels together to solve for problems? Because oftentimes, the status quo is easier. And it's always very easy to pass the buck and not have to take responsibility, right? So the city will point fingers at the state back at the city, or the state will say, well, we need more federal funds. So how do we bring folks together into the same room to figure things out and figure out a pathway forward?
Can I add something, Joyce?
Yeah, please.
And this was not, this is, I mean, one of the things that I think is important also when we think about this is for us as organizations, what do we expect from our government? At what point do these amazing community-based nonprofit organizations, at what point do us as organizations, at what point do small business owners as individuals expect more from their government? There's only so much that our organizations can do to organize and elevate and create and amplify. But at a certain point, we do have certain standards that we should expect our government at a federal level, state level, and local level to be using the intrinsic power of being the government to help alleviate some of these and work with us to alleviate some of these issues that we're trying to solve. So here in California, we've been trying to tackle that through some regional economic development initiatives, essentially forcing regions to work together in many different industries to develop economic development packages that are worthy of state funding. And it's a really interesting concept because it puts labor, small business, finance, housing, healthcare, workforce, all in the same collaboration space to work together to identify an economic development initiative that should be funded. But it requires, it required for California $800 million to do this. And so what is the role of our government in working with us to solve some of these problems and to make sure that the small business voices that we are representing are actually heard and can make their way through, the larger voices from some of the larger special interests?
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say, I'm in full agreement. That's so important to have these voices heard when we think about, programs like PPP and EIDL and when they were rolled out, right? I don't have the statistics off the top of my head, but, so much of the money went to larger corporations and the micro businesses were left out. Business owners of color were left out. And so, when designing programs, you need to think about, especially those with limited funds, right? How do we make it as accessible as possible to folks? Because the people who have or the business owners that have the time and energy to hire someone to access those funds are going to get access to those funds faster versus those owner operated businesses that we talked about that have to navigate finding time to do it, maybe finding a family member to help translate and understand everything that is required on an application. And, there's just hurdle after hurdle to think through. And so having the voices of small business owners in those spaces to magnify some of those challenges and help inform the program design is super important.
Bianca, it looked like you might have something else to add to that. I'm not sure, but
No, I mean, I could
no.
go on. It's
Yeah.
just it pops up, especially when we're talking about, the focus here is on gentrification and anti-displacement measures. Well, some of the themes that we've been hearing from folks are, power imbalances, especially when it comes to commercial lease agreements, accessing new markets, accessing responsible forms of even just accessing capital alone. I know New York has a number of innovative programs to kind of help mitigate some of these issues. But Jose brought up PPP and EIDL. The Paycheck Protection Program was built upon, was using the traditional banking system for success. But what we know through our own polling is that one in four small business owners before COVID-19 had no relationship with a bank. Like, not on a business level at all. And so if we're relying on the existing structures to do the same thing, we're not really going to get anywhere. So it does require, it requires being forward thinking and being creative. And quite frankly, it might require a loss. The federal government and the state government and local governments have the ability to take on more risk. And if small businesses are indeed deemed, riskier to lend to, then it is the job of the government to step in and subsidize those programs that will really reach these very small business owners and eat that cost if it's not, if God forbid, there's a default or something like that happens from time to time. But if you take a look at the numbers, a lot of these programs that have been created to help small business owners actually have very high success rates. And so again, I think when we're thinking about organizing, we need to understand the power structures that exist and really identify what role we expect the government to play in advocating for small business owners. Because quite frankly, the government has a reach that our organizations just do not, right? Everyone and their mom knows about the Paycheck Protection Program, right? Here in California, everybody knows about the COVID-19 relief grant. And so that's powerful. And so how can we, again, work together using the expertise of organizations like Jose's at Chhaya? Your expertise is bar none when it comes to the business owners that you represent and in your community. And so how is the government reaching out to you as they create these programs to really shift that and address some of that power imbalance that we've heard about the last couple of days?
Well said. Thank you so much, Bianca and Jose. Okay, so I'm being told we've only got about 10 minutes left, and I'm not sure that I see very many questions in the chat box. And I do want to lift up one because I know we committed to making space for folks to be able to ask questions and engage with us. And so the one question I am seeing is, are there examples of commercial tenant unions in the US? And I don't know if either of you know the answer to that one, or have even examples of things that you've been seeing in local communities where folks are trying to organize commercial tenant unions. So Jose, maybe I'll start with you, see if you have anything.
Sure. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't know of any examples of commercial tenant unions. But as I mentioned earlier, Chhaya has a history of forming tenant unions on the residential side. And so during the pandemic, when businesses were struggling and falling behind on their rent to landlords, we did attempt to try to duplicate that structure and worked with a couple of legal service providers to help us better understand what our options were. And I think one of the things that we learned is that creating that sort of like legal entity would have been a challenge given the way that New York state laws are structured. So we wound up trying to get the businesses to just kind of agree to an informal sort of agreement amongst each other to negotiate together and not negotiate outside of the group that was signed on. That's as close as we could get to a tenant union. I think it's still within the spirit of a tenant union, but it couldn't be its own sort of legal entity.
And I don't know if you are at liberty to share, but how's that been working out in terms of, those tenants kind of sticking to that agreement, and what sort of has come as a result?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say it was successful, but one of the challenges of organizing small businesses is that businesses exist within a capitalist framework, and self-interest kind of trumps all sometimes. And this was a group of folks that kind of came together specifically around this issue. We hadn't done a lot of that relationship building that we were talking about before. And so when some individuals were able to leverage their individual relationships with the landlord and negotiate some deals, it sort of started to fall apart for others. But I think it was a helpful lesson learned for us about what could lead to a successful union, and the things that we need to think about when entering into some of those agreements.
May I add something really quick, Joyce? So this is a space that I am not as well versed in. However, we have an amazing partner, California Reinvestment Coalition here in California, as part of NCRC, the National Coalition for Community Reinvestment, and one of the issues they've identified, at least when it comes to addressing, whether or not commercial tenants would be able to organize, is that a lot of commercial tenants don't actually even know who their real landlords are. And by real landlords, I mean, there are lots of entities, especially here in the Bay Area, who own multiple properties doing business as something other than, doing business as something other than the single entity that they are. So in other words, there are lots of properties that are actually owned by one entity, but you wouldn't know that when you sign that lease agreement. And so there are a set of transparency measures that CRC has proposed to force those organizations who have these subsidiaries to put their actual legal name on those documents, so that tenants, when they are thinking of organizing or addressing an issue, are able to actually know who they're dealing with, because it would be very difficult to organize when you're not sure, maybe you all have the same landlord and you don't even know it. And so I think, making sure, and this is a larger issue as well, but making sure that these renter protections are strengthened on a local level and on a state level. And that includes a lot of transparency measures, because again, a small business owner is not going to have the time not to be presumptuous here, Jose, so I'll just say myself, won't have the time after a webinar to read up all about it and, do a little memo. And so I think, how can we make this information easier and accessible for a small business owner who did have it in their mind that they wanted to create something like that, is also really key.
Those are great points. And Bianca, I don't know if there's any resources related to what CRC has been working on that you feel like we want to drop into some of the resources later on, but I think SBAN is sort of committed to sharing those resources where they're available within the app. So we've only got a few minutes left, and I do see that there's, I think, an important question that I'll just maybe ask of the two of you before we close out, which is, do you really realistically think there will eventually be commercial tenant protections beyond those created during COVID? And, I guess to kind of stay in alignment with the theme of this particular session, what can we be doing to kind of organize around that? And maybe, I don't know, Jose, you want to take it first?
Sure. I mean, I'm hopeful. This is the reason that we do this work. I think we're sort of at an advantage in New York City in that, at least on the residential side, there are really strong tenant protections. And so it sort of creates an environment and an analog. We have a bill that we're pushing for right now in the city council that would create basically a commercial rent guidelines board, very similar to what we see on the residential side, so that small businesses would have the right to renew their leases, and also that the guidelines board would set a cap for lease renewals, and a lot of transparency. It's, I'm sure it's come up in other panels, but commercial leases with pass-throughs and shared expenses and things like that, the true cost is really challenging for small business owners to really wrap their heads around sometimes. So we are hopeful that there will be tenant protections on that, in that way. But, also we want to be realistic in that commercial tenant protections were first sort of discussed in New York City decades ago, and nothing has come to pass. So it's definitely an uphill battle. And as Bianca mentioned before, I think there was a lot of pressure during the COVID pandemic to protect and work for small businesses. And now that businesses are reopened, that's sort of, out of the general zeitgeist. So we sort of missed an opportunity there probably, but need to think about how we build that momentum back up and talk about the struggles that small businesses are still going through, and the types of protections that'll help them, stay in place.
Yeah, I'll be quick because I know we're pretty much at time here, but I think yeah, I mean, we saw a couple of cool ideas here in California. Unfortunately, I think we have our organizations both have an uphill battle when it comes to educating others, non-small business owners and those outside of the small business community. Again, the different needs between a small business who has an HR department and a small business who does not. Or a business that has an HR department and a business that is not. We saw this with a lot of the transparency and financial regulations, is that there's really not there's no delineation between these commercial tenants and these commercial tenants. And when we're talking about these very small commercial tenants, and providing some kind of regulatory regime that helps with that power imbalance that we've been talking about, you have to make that clear, and that's very tricky when it comes to public policy. And so there are a couple promising ideas, but I think the work again really starts on the organizing level, because if I'm saying something, nobody. Reporters don't care what I have to think. They want to hear from a small business owner. So finding that small business owner that has the time and is available to speak on that is really key. And so I think as long as we continue thinking in the mode of organizing and elevating and amplifying, we might be able to use the momentum that was built over COVID-19 to do something really special in 2023 and beyond, especially when it comes to small commercial tenants.
That was a great and I think hopeful way for us to, continue this work. And, I just really, really want to thank you both for the incredible work that you're doing at all the levels that you're doing it. And, really want to thank folks for attending today's session. We are at time, and I knew we would run out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to thank everyone again for attending, invite you to take a sound bath, and join our virtual happy hour with DJ Kamish, which is starting now. So thank you again, and just much gratitude to our speakers again. Have a good day, everyone.